Good evening, economic students. So we're going to be steaming ahead in chapter 19. We were talking about gross domestic product, and I think we actually ended the last lecture drawing a distinction between gross domestic product and gross national product. Now, most Americans have no idea there's a difference. I'll bet most educated Americans at least heard the term gross domestic product and gross national product, but I'll wager they don't know the difference. But you want to know the difference, right? So you remember that gross domestic product is the sum total of the value of all final goods and services produced in a nation within a year. Produced within a nation. That's gross domestic. Domestic means at home. Gross national product includes money earned by American companies overseas. So Econ, Apple have operations in Saudi Arabia or China or wherever, and they sell their products in other countries all over the world. Their profits would count toward gross national product, but not gross domestic product, except for the stuff here at home. Another aspect of gross national product is the money that is sent by Americans living overseas back home. So you're an American living overseas, an expat, you earn money and you're taxed on it at home, then that would count as gross national product, but not domestic product. What doesn't count as gross national product is money earned in the United States and sent out of the United States. So a Mexican living in Texas earns money, sends it home to his family. That doesn't count as part of gross national product. Now, as it happens, there's a kind of a wash in America. The last data in your book, I think it was 2016, it came out 0.0% difference between gross national product and gross domestic product. When you factor out the companies of America working overseas and the money that goes out of the country, it all washes out to just about exactly even. So in our case, there's not that big a difference. You see gross domestic, gross national, they're going to be almost exactly the same number. But for many countries around the world, they're quite different. Think about Mexico. All those millions of Mexican citizens who live in the United States, their work in the United States would not count for gross domestic product in Mexico. But their work and the money they send home to Mexico would count for gross national product. Got it? So a country like Mexico or the Philippines or Indonesia that has lots of people who travel out of the country and earn money and send money back home to the folks, they're going to have a much bigger gross national product than their gross domestic product of what goes on strictly inside the country. So there is a difference there. Now, the net national product is what you get when you take the gross national product and subtract the gross domestic product from it. And that's going to be, I'm sorry, my apologies, that's wrong. Net national product is what happens when you take the gross national product and take out depreciation. My apologies, this is really an important idea and I want to make sure you know it. Depreciation is the value of machinery wearing out. So you see I've got a durable good, a machine, a pizza oven for my Domino's store. And I expect that Domino's pizza oven to last 10 years before I'd have to replace it. But what I need to do is depreciate its value for each year until I replace it. It's slowly wearing out and will need to be replaced. So net national product takes out investment, right? That's the money that businesses spend on their operations, the rent, the building facilities, renting facilities, buying equipment and all that to run their operations. That's taking into account depreciation. We don't want them getting full credit for something that they're going to use for a long time, since, that way it's kind of spread it out over time. All right, so there's that. The next section, 19.2, makes a very important distinction between nominal values and real values of GDP. Nominal value is the money value right now in present day dollars. The nominal value on the item when you go in the store and you see the price tag on it and you pick it up, you go to the cashier, you give them cash, that's the nominal value. Nominal comes from a Latin word for name. That's the name tag value on the product right now. But remember inflation. If I want to compare economic numbers over a period of time, I have to know the nominal value of the thing now, the nominal value of the thing in the past, and what the rate of inflation was in between. When I was a kid, you could get a Snickers bar for 50 cents at 7-Eleven. Something tells me it's way over $1 now. That's inflation, right? Same Snickers bar costs more than twice as much as it did back in the 70s and early 80s because of inflation. The value of $1 is less in purchasing power because of inflation over that long period of time. If I just knew the gross domestic product in 1970, in the dollars of 1970, and the gross domestic product of 2020 in the dollars of 2020, I can't really compare them unless I take into account the inflation in between. So that's the difference. The nominal value is the value at that time, the price tag at that moment. So the value in 1970s dollars for the 70s GDP and the 2020 GDP in 2020 dollars, nominal. But if I'm going to compare them, I take inflation account, that gives me a real comparison, the real value. Now, in America today, our economists set the benchmark for inflation at 2005, the value of $1 in 2005. So 1970, I need to adjust that GDP figure from 1970 to 2005 dollars, but I'd also need to adjust my 2020 value in nominal terms to 2005 dollars to be able to compare. The real value will be in 2005 dollars. What does that mean, by the way? It means when you look at the chart on, well, let's see, which chart would it be? There's a chart in here. Okay. Yeah. Look at the chart on page 458. That is working it out, table 19.6 on 458. You'll see there 1960 through 1990, and it goes on the next page to 2010. And you'll see there that the nominal value in 1960, in 1960 dollars, in 1960, the GDP of the United States was $543.3 billion. But they used something called a GDP deflator, set at 2005 as 100% value of the money. And because between 1960 and 2005, there's 45 years of inflation, when you multiply out that deflator into divide the deflator into the value of the 1960s money, like they do in the third column there, you wind up with a real GDP in 1960 of $2,859. See? 4 times bigger because things had inflated between 1960 and 2005 by about 4 times. So the real GDP in 1960 is $2,859 billion, so $2,859,500,000,000. And you'll see the inflation, the GDP deflator takes inflation into account, goes on, and if you flip the page, you'll see there in 2005, it was $13,095,400,000,000, and that is exactly the same as the real GDP because 2005 is our benchmark, right? But if you go to 2010, your deflator is going to be over 100. And when you divide it, you're actually going to get a smaller number than the nominal GDP. Since 2005, you're going to have a smaller number because of inflation. Look at that. What you'll see there is the somewhat disappointing news that in the 5 years between 2005 and 2010, real GDP didn't improve hardly at all. Literally $3 billion difference over 5 years. That is virtually no growth at all in the economy of the United States in that 5-year period. Why, you may ask, did that 5 years go so badly when you can see 5-year increments in between are shooting up $200 billion? Why just pocket change between 2005 and 2010? The Great Recession of 2008. The economy retracted and was only just beginning to revive in 2010. So that's why. But that GDP deflator is a way of getting all that data from all those years. You take it and you divide it into the nominal value of that year, and it gives you its value in 2005 dollars. That will raise meaningfully all early GDP figures you've got to real values much higher, but it will lower the GDP numbers you've got in nominal terms after 2005 because you want everything to be done in 2005 dollars to compare everything to the same benchmark dollar. That's real GDP. Okay, got a few minutes yet. Looking at page 460, there you'll see that chart, figure 19.9, that graph, and it gives the GDP in billions of dollars, both real and nominal. And you'll see that GDP deflator, when you add it in, it gives a higher real GDP for everything before 2005 and a lower GDP for everything after 2005. So that those numbers cross nominal and real at 2005. Okay? All right. The curving line there tells me that inflation, by the way, see that nominal GDP, how it sloops down before it starts going up sharper? That reminds us of the very high inflation rate we experienced in the late 1970s. It was a bad time for inflation in America, like 20% for a while, really bad. And that's why it sloops down like that before going up sharply as they got inflation under control. Okay, tracking real GDP over time. That'll be the last thing I talk about here. But look at that figure 19.10. This is on page 461. And if you have a tablet like I do, you can make it bigger. But it's awfully tiny in the book. I don't know why they did this. But that shows real GDP over time in the United States from 1900 to 2000, probably 2014, I think. But you can see there, in the 1930s, it sloped down. It went meaningfully down. That's the Great Depression. Then in the late 1940s, it sloped down again at the end of World War II. We had huge growth in World War II. Look how it spikes up with World War II. But when the war ended, the government stopped buying planes and tanks and all that and paying all those companies good money and workers to build those things. And so we went into a recession. Always a big war has a recession at the end. Always. Goes on up. The late 1960s and 70s, partly that's going to be the drawdown from the Vietnam War, is going to cause a retraction in the economy. But the main thing was the oil shock in the late 70s. Price of oil went crazy through the roof because OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, began monkeying with the price as a cartel to drive it up. And high inflation means real GDP goes down. High inflation means real GDP goes up. My apologies. But it doesn't mean the economy slows down. My apologies there. Okay. You'll also see in the early 1980s another dip. There was another recession in the late Carter, early Reagan years. But then shoots up like a rocket. The 80s was a boom time after that. Lots of defense spending, big tax cut from the Reagan administration. The late 90s would see another tick down. That was the internet bubble that burst, followed by 9/11, which had a downturn, a recession right after it. Then the big dip up there, the Great Recession of 2008. So you can see this. America's economy has grown very steadily. This is real GDP. So big growth after World War II. After 1947, that thing is going up, 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 up. Real GDP. So America, by far the richest country in the world. Okay, next lecture, we'll finish out this unit on these big macro measures of an economy. Thank you.